evening. Thank you all for coming, even those of you that have to be here, not by choice. But before you start, I do want to share something just real quick. It's on my mind. So before I came to the meeting today, I had my grandbaby, who's 2. And as a grandfather, I have one job, that's to give her snacks whenever she wants, right? I don't have to put her to sleep, right? And so I gave her chocolate, which is always a mistake with a 2-year-old. And I made the mistake of wearing a white shirt, so I got like a fingerprint over here, right? And so my first thought when I got chocolate on my sleeve was, crap, right? Now I got to wash my shirt, right? Or whatever it is, right? Or I got to, maybe it won't come out or whatever. And I start getting a little frustrated, right? Even though I'm the one that gave her the chocolate. It is my fault in the first place anyway. But I share that with you because I'm fortunate in that, I can go home and wash my shirt. I work for ServPro, and we've got a lot of crews that are in Asheville, North Carolina right now. You can't even get into Asheville right now. People we're talking to there say it's going to be this weekend before a lot of the businesses can even get back and see what happened to their property. I've heard some numbers on the news, but I think when the official numbers come out, it's going to amaze people with the number of lost lives. The numbers I'm hearing just from people we've had boots on the ground is pretty astonishing. And so, I can go home and wash my shirt, right? There are people in communities across the Appalachian area in Florida that don't have homes to go wash clothes in. They don't have schools to go to in the morning. They don't have athletic facilities that they can play sports at. They don't have family members that they'll ever see again. And so as we open up the meeting and take a moment of silence before we, take a pledge for the flag, I just ask us to just kind of think about that and, the things that are really most important, right? And the things that maybe we let bother us, that maybe just shouldn't, that we can let go. So I'm going to open up and I'll take a moment of silence. If anybody wants to join me, please feel free, and then we'll pledge to the flag. But thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm calling to order the study session of the Sumner County School Board, scheduled for October 1st, 2024. Welcome October and happy Halloween. We're going to start with the first item on the agenda tonight, which is the TISA overview. Mr. Langford, you and your team.
Hold your horses. This one is a barn burner filled with excitement. There's nothing more exciting than TISA. But I do think, especially with the new board coming on, it's important because even now when you talk to a lot of folks in schools, and even, I've had several conversations with Mr. Hyde, because of course Mr. Hyde led for decades under the old BEP formula. And so most people, when they think of the way that we're funded, still think that we're on some variation of BEP, which basically they had this calculation formula where they put everything in and they did it to the district, and they paid for like 40% of teachers. They did all this. TISA it's Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement. It changes the game in the way money comes to us because everything now is done per student. So we code each of our 30,000, 500 or so students with all these different items, and then we're funded based on that. So I wanted to run through most of this is from a okay. All right. This is a slide deck that I borrowed from the state. I just changed it to Sumner County numbers. But just to run through, the goals of TISA are to empower each student to read proficiently by 3rd grade and each grade thereafter, prepare each high school graduate to succeed in the post-secondary program or career of the graduate's choice, and provide each student with the resources needed to succeed regardless of the student's individual circumstances. And I think we're really aligned right in with where the state is on the way that they're funding us on TISA. Okay, so developing TISA in 2021, Governor Lee launched a review of the basic education program. They did months of public engagement, town halls, meetings, online live chats, phone calls, emails, and more. Dr. Phillips was on a team. A lot of other superintendents and district leaders were on teams throughout the process of building TISA. So they passed it in the spring of 2022, and it replaced a 30-year-old resource-based formula with a student-based formula. So it went into effect in the 23-24 school year, and it included an additional $1 billion in state investment in education. All right, so this is kind of the way that TISA works. There is the base, which covers the essentials each student needs for a K-12 education. There are the weights, which provide additional funds for students with unique learning needs or who may need additional supports. I'll go into some of these individually, but base is just like we get that dollar amount. And Amanda, right now for a student, it's $7,076, something like that.
I just left my paper upstairs. I'll look it up.
Okay.
Sorry.
I believe it's $7,076 per student. So we get that for every student in Sumner County. All right, the weights, the unique learning needs, are all the different things like special education, EL, and they're broken down like based on the number of service hours, or like if it's EL, like someone that's new to the country that doesn't speak English at all receives more funding than someone that's basically proficient in English that's just on consult. Again, it's funded by the student needs. Direct funding offers students learning opportunities beyond everyday classroom instruction. We'll walk through some of that in a little bit, but it's like CTE classes, fourth graders, different things like that, where the state wants to make a direct investment in student achievement. And then outcomes funding incentivizes student achievement and educational excellence. So they have different touch points where they look at proficiency rates and things like that, and then they ascribe money to that. It's a little fluid because they put the money in the pot, they see how many people reach the objectives, and they divide that money up. I'll go through how much we received last year, but Anna Connor, if you know Anna, she is a now supervisor of data and accountability under Ms. Skinner, and she is really one of the best data people you'll ever want to meet. She was a phenomenal classroom teacher.
$7,075.
That was close, $7,075. So anyway, she's been working on trying to help our schools understand what this money means. Now, I think in the long term, right now, like they just give us that money and it goes into the pot with all of our other money. I do think one of the things that Ms. Brown and I have been talking about is how do we recreate in Sumner County kind of the same thing that we see here. The state is giving us this outcome money because students and schools have achieved at a higher level. So how can we use some of this money or all of this money to incentivize things that are going on in schools to reward and encourage excellence? For instance, I'll give you an example. We've been #1 in STEM schools for a long time. We've kind of hit a plateau, and the state was given some years $20,000, some years $10,000 to those schools so that they could buy supplies, they could buy robots, they could do different things like that. During ESSER, we were able to come alongside and do a lot of those things too. ESSER money is gone now. The state no longer provides that, so schools do a tremendous amount of extra work and everything. There's not really any reward, but we know it's excellent and outstanding for kids. So how can we incentivize schools to do excellent things? So that'll be a part of our budget conversation this year. We also have to make sure, one of the things that the state requires is that we do a comparability report to make sure that we're treating schools comparably. So for instance, sometimes they'll flag us. One year we got flagged and we had to explain why we had a part-time library clerk at one school and didn't have it at all schools, and we had to go through and justify that. So what we have to do is build out metrics and ratios and things like that to show how we're differentiating pay, how we're differently. For instance, we could differentiate pay for special education teachers last year because we could show that special education teachers were doing work above and beyond what they did as a classroom teacher managing a special ed caseload. So when we do differentiate pay or anything like that, we need to have a rationale for why we're doing it to make this formula work. Okay, so the first thing is base funding. All right, so don't do like last year. I added all this money up. I was a rookie. I added all this money up, and I was so excited because I thought we were getting an extra $67 million from the state. Turned out that's not the way it works, and I'm going to explain why. So we're going to show you all these numbers, and I'm going to show how it's calculated, the amount that we get. So base funding is if you just take our number of students times that number. It's increased to 7,075. So it goes up. So we're allotted $213.3 million. This covers the basics of education needs, such as teachers, school counselors, principals, facility operations, and more. Gives every student the same strong education foundation. Schools are funded on a student basis, and base funding is the same for every student in the state, regardless of the student's geographic location. So on the base, they don't take into account poverty, urban versus rural, suburban versus rural. It's just a straight flat amount to cover all the expenses. All right, weight funding. This ensures every student's education needs are supported by providing additional funds as multipliers into the base funding. So for like economically disadvantaged students, it'll take a percentage and multiply that by the base, and you get that money for each economically disadvantaged student. Concentrated poverty are students that may not be economically disadvantaged by parental income, but they live in an area where there's a significant amount of poverty. Students living in smaller, sparse community, and then unique learning needs, students with disabilities, English learners, students experiencing characteristics of dyslexia. There are 9 different categories of unique learning needs, and based on the amount of service hours or the amount of need of those kids, the funding per student increases. So for instance, some of our CDC students that are tube fed or have significant other health impairments, they receive a higher percentage of support on the funding formula than a child who has, is in speech language therapy or something like that. Not that that child is not important, but the amount of service hours that they receive is significantly less than a kid that requires service hours the entire time they're at school. So $41.3 million is generated in weights funding last year, or for this year. All right, so just to give you an idea of how TISA supports students' individual needs, economically disadvantaged is the base times 25%. Last year we had 5,358 students that qualified as economically disadvantaged. If you'll notice, like if you look at the states, the state has changed the way that the feds have changed the way free and reduced lunch is calculated. So our numbers at all our schools have gone up quite a bit in some places. What they've done is they've adjusted it up to reflect. Obviously, if you've driven around Sumner County, the cost to live in Sumner County is significantly higher than it was a decade ago. So you're going to see a phenomenon in our county over the next decade or two where we're going to get richer and poorer at the same time. It's harder and harder for middle class folks to live in Sumner County. But so they account for students living in areas of concentrated poverty. Students in sparsely populated communities and students in small districts, we don't qualify for that. And then students with unique learning needs, I've already explained this is our special ed, students with dyslexia, English language learners, we had 8,612 services. That's not 8,612 students. Students may generate one service, they may generate up to 4. And that's where Ms. Dam's team, Dr. Bowman's team, some of them, they have to figure out which 4, if a child has 5 or 6, they have to figure out which 4 to code into the system, because the state funds off of the code associated with that student. All right, direct funding, K-3 literacy, 4th grade literacy support, career and technical education, post-secondary assessments, which are ACT and ACT retake, and then if you have charter schools. So $16 million for Sumner County last year. So this works out to $500 per K-3 student, $500 per 4th grader, $5,000 average per CTE coursework. So what they do here is they take, like if you're on a block schedule and you have 4 classes and one of those is a CTE class, that's 0.25 because it's 25% of the day. If it's 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 8, then it calculates differently. They are changing this, and this will continue to evolve. They are now going to start paying more for a higher level CTE class than they pay for an introductory level CTE class. They want to encourage students to take, and districts to incentivize kids to take higher level, so not just like introduction to marketing or Ag 1, but to be in small animal care or entrepreneurship or something like that to push kids into those higher level CTE classes. 2 administrations of the ACT, that's about $186 per student. And then if you have charter schools, you get $504 per student. All right, our outcomes funding. Last year we received right at $3 million, incentivized achievement and educational excellence, and it acknowledges student academic success and improvement for early literacy in elementary schools, math and ELA in middle school, college and career readiness benchmarks in high school. These are things that we all do pretty well. It checks in middle school, it checks 8th grade English and math proficiency rates. So Ms. Connor has shared that with our middle school principals to it's a great incentive for us. We tend to sometimes see a little bit of a dip in achievement scores in 8th grade and then again in 9th grade. So it gives us an opportunity to incentivize that and make principals aware of that factor. All right, so this is where it gets interesting. The local contribution calculates how much of the total funding is provided by the state and the minimum that is required to be provided by each local government. The state and local share is split 70-30 statewide for the base and weights only. The state provides 100% of the funds for direct and outcomes funding. Fiscal capacity further breaks out the 30% local share into local contributions for each district. If you were on the board last year when we did budget, if you remember, I pointed out that our local contribution went from 2.59 to 2.63 once TASER and UTCBER came up with the local contribution number. That 0.04 of a point change, it resulted in about $1.3 million in lost revenue. We are above the minimum maintenance of effort for the county, so when local funding increases until it gets to about 125, 126 million, that will come out of the money that we receive. You're going to see a lot of talk about TISA, I think, this year, because a lot of school districts around the state are funded at the maintenance of effort level for the county. So anytime that number goes above that, then the county is going to have to kick that in, not the schools. TISA is going to lead to property tax rate increases in a lot of smaller counties around the state. So just know when you hear talk of this in the spring when we get budgeting season, it's not going to affect what the county commission has to contribute to us because we are so far above the maintenance of effort that it'll be a long time. There's probably not a time where the local contribution is going to impact the commission's need to raise revenue. All right, so if you add all those numbers up that I showed on previous slides, it comes out to about $271 million. The local contribution, that 30%, is $68.3 million, $36 million. So when you subtract that out, it's $202 million. They hold the money, like they allocate the ACT money to us, but they never send it to us. They just purchase all the ACTs at the state, and it's more cost effective and it's easier to manage. So they do that for us. So that's the. I'm sorry, I didn't change slides. There's that slide. This shows the breakdown. So you'll sometimes hear the gaudy number, the $270 million, that's allocated based on all those calculations. But remember, anytime TISA funding increases, we get 70% of it. So keep that in mind. You know, you'll hear some things like, we thought we were going to get an increase in pre-K, voluntary pre-K allocations, because they did increase the money, but they just increased enough because they shifted it from the 25% local contribution to 30%. So they increased it enough to offset, which was nice, because we were able to not have to make a late addition to the budget because of that change. All right, so we don't qualify. You know, it's funny because we hear a lot of talk in Sumner County about growth. You have to have over 1.25% growth from the previous year to qualify for a fast growth student stipend or a fast growing infrastructure stipend. 1.25% for fast growth student stipend, 2% for the fast growing infrastructure stipend. The infrastructure requires 3 consecutive years of 2% growth. So districts like Rutherford that are adding sometimes between 1,500 and 2,000 students a year, which the way I like to think about this is that's like adding a high school every year. So infrastructure wise, if you add a high school like they built in Rutherford County, it's probably about $175 million. That's the cost of adding that many students, and that's why the state is kicking in money for infrastructure for them. For Sumner County, you know, we've been flat, relatively flat the last 2 years. I would anticipate if interest rates keep going down, there are more houses now being built in the northern part of the county. There's a subdivision in Westmoreland, but even there, if you're driving by those are starting at $350 to $375. It's just a different time. You're going to see new families migrating to the northern parts of the county, or I think probably to older parts like on the Walton Ferry Peninsula. I think you're going to see a lot of transition there because it's places where housing is affordable, and it's a huge need for our county right now. Okay. Supporting teachers. This year, the governor, in his budget, if you remember, allocated a certain amount for school districts to go to $47,800. If you remember, our number to do that was about $9 million. What was allocated in TISA was $3.9 million. So just when you hear the money that's designated, it's divided up on a formula too. So we get a percentage, which we really appreciate, but it will probably never match the amount that we actually spend on teachers. Again, we have to do it because we need to do it to keep the best. But there's about a $5.5–6 million gap between what it cost us to go to 47.8 and what we received in TISA dollars. But it's $3.9 million we didn't have to raise locally. So we appreciate, and I try to point this out when you talk to our legislators, that we really appreciate the fact that since 2015, I think $88 million new dollars have been allocated to K-12 education in Sumner County from the state. And that's a game changer for us, and we really appreciate it. All right, so reporting, and I would go back on that to something that Dr. Phillips always pointed out when we would get frustrated, like when we had all the problems with online testing, and districts were going to opt out. At that point, I think we got about $144 million from the state. And Dr. Phillips would always point out, if you know someone that would like to give $144 million a year, we'll stop doing testing. But he said, if we don't give the test, then TDOE is going to call and they say, would you like to give us that $144 million back in one payment, or would you like to break it up over 3? So, we're very appreciative of the state for providing those funds, very appreciative of the legislature. It does mean that we have accountability requirements and standards, and a lot of this is a good thing. And I want to commend, as we've seen over the past few months, Ms. Brown and her team do a tremendous job of stewarding and taking care of the district's money. Very thankful for our finance team. But detailed reporting on funding and spending will be publicly posted at the school and district levels per federal requirements and be included on annual report cards. Every district will have the opportunity to provide annual input on what the district hopes to see funded, research-based and return on investment, explanations of local context on why the district is unable to afford those resources in the existing budget. And the Department of Education will produce a report each year to include an academic analysis, accountability report cards, TISA review requests, and expert reviews on TISA and recommendations. Transparency and accountability. When we come to the full meeting next time, you will receive an annual TISA report to vote on. We will try to share that as early as we can so that you can look over it. We will send out a remind to collect feedback from parents in the community, and then y'all will have an opportunity for public comments at our next meeting, and then we will vote on the TISA accountability report. Ms. Skinner's team is working on that now. There are some budget things that Ms. Brown's team will have to look at and contribute to. So we're really close on that, but it basically follows a lot of the same categories that we've already looked at, but it's saying, how are we using the dollars that are being given? What are we prioritizing? What are we investing in? For instance, last year we saw that we moved a lot of things over from ESSER into GP. So you saw some strategic investments we've made over the last couple of years that were then caught in our TISA funding, or part of our TISA funding, like career coaches. That's still, we went from almost 100% of that being paid out of the Innovative Schools Model Grant that we got, $1 million for each high school and $500,000 for each middle school. It shifted to us catching a bigger percentage of that. By next year, Amanda, I believe we'll cover 100% of the career coaches. 50 next year, and then 100% the following year. So that's a big investment that we're making as a district, because we see the need for kids to be able to find their first and future career. For instance, Bobby Kane, our school counselor coordinator. Bobby's phenomenal. That's an investment that we made using ESSER, but now it's being funded out of TISA. We've made lots of investments in early literacy, foundational literacy. So Ms. Skinner is just about done with that report, and we'll share it with you as soon as we can once Ms. Brown's team can look at it, put in the budget numbers, and then after I have time to review it, we can share it. And of course, the State Board of Education, the Progress Review Board, different layers at the state will also have a hand in doing reporting to make sure that statewide we're being held accountable for the money that we're receiving. All right, so again, this is what the state has put forward as the goals of TISA, addressing the need of each individual student. And Mr. Daniels, I think to go back to what you were saying earlier, I think it's important. It's sometimes easy at our level to lose sight of the individual student, right? Because we throw around numbers like 30,500. We throw around numbers like 5,800 employees. But each of those children has a face and a name. Each of those employees has a face or a name. And what we are finding is as we remember those faces, it makes it easier for us to do our job to meet the needs of each individual student. We're in the process of doing strategic planning meetings with each principal now, and I think it was, Ms. Skinner, Ms. Dam, Ms. Herron were talking to a principal this morning because they were realizing they needed to do some work with their special education students. And historically, what we have seen is that our people historically have had a deep love for special education students, but we haven't always pushed them academically as rigorously and hard as we could. We've had lower expectations for them. And what we're seeing is that the harder we push, the more we support, the higher expectations we have, the better kids do, regardless of what their little TISA code is. I want us to always keep as a board and on my team that we serve individual students and individual families. I don't want us to lose because we have a student-based funding formula. The purpose of this, as the state has said, is to address the needs of each individual student. So we got to make sure that we always keep that at the forefront. That we take time to learn students' names, learn families' names, and ensure that we're meeting their needs. Support the state's economic vitality by helping students develop workforce relevant skills that meet employers' needs. Ms. Skinner shared last time some of the vision for the instruction department. If you ever get a chance to follow Mr. Moore, Chase Moore around, you'll see that everything that he does with federal Perkins money, everything he does in CTE is directly connected to the employment needs of our community in this area. We've been in, Ms. Skinner and I were in a meeting yesterday, and we were talking about how Middle Tennessee has now jumped the state line into southern Kentucky, goes as far as Bowling Green, goes as far south almost to Huntsville. The Mid-South corridor that Nashville is the engine for stretches way beyond Nashville. And there are huge needs for coders, heavy machinery operators, all kinds of different technical skills. And the only thing that is going to limit the economic growth of Nashville is our inability to produce a skilled labor force. The only thing holding back more companies moving here from California, and realize, when Meta built the data warehouse in Gallatin, when they built the first one, they became the largest taxpayer in Sumner County. They surpassed Haganese that had always been the number one. That place has 115, 120 employees as opposed to the thousands that are employed by Haganese. We want those industries to come in because it lowers the tax base on homeowners, right? The number one way to keep property tax low is to have industry come in. We need more of it. To get more industry, we've got to have more skilled labor. It also, again, to jump back to the first point, we want to meet the needs of individual students. We were talking, I'm sporting the shirt today, if you haven't noticed. This is Middle Tech College High School in Portland. Mr. Howell moved over from Portland East there, and he is like a new man. He is deeply invested in each of these kids. He closed his eyes and he told us where every kid sat. And he told us about them, and he said, I want to paint the room and I want to put up the logos of the schools. He's given them, they're the Titans now, because they're going to be Titans of industry. And they have a shirt and they have a mission and they're connected in. Every year we've had every kid that gets a welding certification gets hired before they graduate. We will soon hopefully be voting to give the land and the building to TCAT, and then the legislature is probably going to fund about $35 million to add about another 30,000 square feet, because there's a huge need. Like right now, there are people lined up for 6 months to take classes at TCAT Portland. That's going to give us a lot of opportunities. Some of the things that Ms. Skinner shared with you last time, to take the walls off the high schools, to allow kids to move around the county, to not allow zip code to limit their opportunity. It's fascinating. We were in a meeting yesterday with some districts from around the state, and it's fascinating. We all kind of have the same problem with career technical education. Large districts like us have tons of CTE programming, but it's tied to the physical construct of a school, so you end up limited by where you go to school. Small districts typically have one high school, and so it limits their opportunities because they can only put so much in a small high school. So what they are trying to do is figure out how they can partner with other counties to be able to create opportunities for students that cross county lines. We have to find a way to take advantage of what we have building by building to open up opportunities for students to be able to move. And we don't want to limit that opportunity because a kid doesn't have a ride. You know, it's terrible to create a state-of-the-art aviation program and then not have it accessible to most of the county because they don't have transportation. That's an obstacle that we've got to figure out. It's really, for me, it's a moral obligation. We used to do this in the 70s and 80s. Mr. Utley ran the shop program where TCAT is now for well over 2 decades. And we bused kids there from Portland, White House, and Westmoreland, and they took classes there. It's easy to do. We just have to figure out the transportation piece. That's an obstacle we ought to be able to figure out. So that ties in with the state's economic vitality. It empowers districts and schools with the flexibility to meet the needs of the unique populations they serve. I am hopeful that we can advocate with the legislature and the state to create more flexibility. You know, 48.8% of our teachers this year are coming from job-embedded programs. We've had a lot of meetings over the last couple of weeks about how to best support new teachers. The last year we had compensation and capital as our 2 main budget priorities. I can already tell you that one of our main budget priorities this year will be supporting new teachers because we expect that 48.8 job embedded to be the smallest number of job embedded teacher candidates we'll ever have. We could be in 5 years, we might be at 85% job embedded. Colleges of education are not producing graduates fast enough to meet the needs of school systems, and there's a demographic collapse that's going to hit higher education soon because there just aren't as many kids as there were 2 decades ago. Colleges are built on a funding model and class model from 20 years ago. And I talked to the president of Virginia Tech, I've talked to several others, and they know it's coming, but colleges are slow and hard to change. So we're going to have to build out supports, and we're going to need increased flexibility and autonomy to be able to do things because we are very nimble for a large district. We do a lot of really innovative things. Got some that I wish I could tell you tonight that we're not quite there yet, that we'll be telling soon. It's really going to benefit the kids of Sumner County. We're very, very excited about. Improves transparency and accountability in education funding. I'm not going to say that TISA is an easy formula to understand, but it is way easier than BEP. There aren't 5 people alive that could figure out BEP, if that. And they changed it up every year, and they never fully funded it. So you're funding a formula that's not fully funded, and then adjusting it. So thank God we don't have to do BEP anymore. And builds on the bold programmatic reforms in Tennessee and funds their sustainability. I will say the group that Skinner and I have been involved in the past 4 or 5 months, Rethinking High School, one of the things that I think we've come away with, there are some states that are doing more innovative things at the state level, but not many. And no state, to my knowledge, has funded career technical education like Tennessee has. Lots of states have changed the constructs and systems and structures at the top, but they haven't provided the money. We're firm believers that if you believe something's important, you put it in the budget. And Tennessee has done that. And so we're very appreciative to the legislature, to the county commission, to the school board for allowing us to be bold and to do things. You know, like if you walk in I'm excited when we can start to take some bus tours and go see things in our schools. Because I think the thing that's going to blow you away when we walk into a high school is it's not the high school that we walked into. You know, when I speak to community groups, I tell them that when I took ag shop when I was a freshman, we just welded everything in the shop together one day and then broke it apart the next day. These kids are doing, I mean, they're fabricating metal, they're building robotic hands, they're doing amazing stuff, and I think you'll really enjoy seeing it. All right, so that's TISA in a nutshell. Do y'all have any questions?
Yeah, can you just kind of one more time, you kind of mentioned it when you're going through the numbers, but when the state says, or the governor signs a bill and says, hey, I'm giving teachers a 5% raise, what does that mean for our community? That does not mean that every teacher in our county automatically gets 5% added to their paycheck, because that's not the way the money comes down.
Yeah. So I think that one thing that I will say what I like about the way that we're doing it now is, and I understand, the legislature got really frustrated because if you were above the state minimum under BP, then you could do whatever you wanted with the money as long as you were above the state minimum. So they would put money in for teacher raises, and a lot of districts wouldn't put it into teacher raises. And the way BP works, they didn't really have any control once they let it go. So at TISA, they are putting this money in, and they're saying this is where we want everybody to get to. Like by law, we have to be at 50,000 next year. So this is where they want us to get to, and we're going to put 100. I think it was 125 million they put in last year. Well, by the funding formula, that worked out to about 3.9 million. It cost us about 8 or 9 to go to 47,800. But you know, there's two ways to look at that: glass half full, glass half empty. We needed to get to 47.8 last year. Without the state support, we got to come up with 9 million. If they give us 4, then we got to come up with the rest. So I'm very thankful for that. But I do think, Mr. Nash, to your point, it's a lot more transparent because we have this number on our final TISA form. You know, 3.9 million has to go for teacher raises. You can go higher, but it has to go there. Yeah, I would suspect the governors are going to always say 5%. And I don't blame them. It sounds way better than to say we're going to put $125 million in and we're going to divide it up equally among 140, or by proportion among all districts. That's hard to, that's not good politics. But yeah, so if you hear 5%, rarely will the actual funding meet 5%. Thank you, Mr. Brown. I felt like I was in a sauna. Any other questions?
I'm trying to get in between. We're a little too cold though. We're Goldilocks in it tonight, everybody.
Ms. Bernie?
I thought the Lord was returning.
I'm just gonna say the warm feels real nice, but with the weights and the unique learning needs, you talked a little bit about the coding. Does that include our 504 students or just IEP students?
Just IEP. There's no funding for 504.
Good. Mr. King?
Yeah, I'm curious, when do we actually get the money? Like when, I mean, do we get it prior to the school year? Does it come in installments? I mean, do we get like a big lump sum payment? I'm just curious. I mean,
Yes.
it's 201 million in August, and then, I mean, does it come in by the first paycheck? I mean, when are these transactions coming in? Like how?
So
Yeah.
the outcomes comes, like they do a run in, last year they did a run in December, and then they did another run in February because they have to check. So the accountability measures they check, some of that is like the stuff based on the achievement testing, they run that in December. You have until, for graduation rate and some of the career readiness stuff, you have until August 1st for late graduates in the summer. So that cutoff date is later, so they have to do 2 runs. So we received the outcome funding, that 2.9 million. We received the bulk of that in December, and then I think we received about 140,000 extra in February. Besides that, it comes in monthly.
Okay, so the state is sending us money every month.
It cash flows out.
I gotcha. Okay, and then just I'm curious if the county just hypothetically doesn't approve the budget, does that affect TISA funding? I mean, let's say they give us an increase in funding. I mean, what would happen in that scenario?
So it's interesting because since the state changed the law on commissions passing school budgets, no one's really tested it. So best bet is that you would go back to your previous year's budget. So it would not affect the state funding, right? That number would stay the same. The revenue stream would stay the same, but what you could spend would be limited to what you'd budgeted the previous year.
Okay, so if they give us an increase, like this past year they gave us like 7 million or whatever, and we would still get that funding, but it would just go into it would be allocated.
Well, you know, I think what's hard about that, Mr. King, is like, for instance, if we had not passed a budget, right, like we couldn't wait until the budget passed to staff and operate White House Intermediate and Liberty Creek Middle in the new location. So we had to go ahead and hire those positions. The question would be, is if we had to go back to last year's budget, what would we do to cover those new positions for White House Intermediate? And that's why I'm saying there's a lot of gray areas there that won't be resolved until some county goes past that deadline. That's why usually the comptroller starts showing up at commission meetings because they don't want it to go past. They changed that and made it so hard to do because they don't think there's any reason for a county to go past that.
Isn't it law, by law, they're required,
My understanding that they're required to pass it by that date.
Yeah.
And the comptroller, there has been a county recently that the comptroller showed up to their commission meetings with that in front, and I think they passed it. They passed the budget on the very last day, pretty much, but it didn't go past that date.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what would happen because the comptroller can't make you pass it. Like a commission could still vote against it.
Yeah, but we would still get the state funding. They're not going to cut the funding.
Well,
they're
I
not
don't-
going to say, oh, well, we were going to give you 10 million increase this year, but because you didn't pass the budget,
So,
we're not going to,
We're required by October 1st to submit to the state the budget that has been passed, and that requires Mr. Daniels' approval. That requires multiple approvers within the our departments. Mr. Daniels, then it goes to the county clerk. She has to approve it. Yes, this has been approved budget. If that's not submitted by October 1st, they say they will withhold TISA funding. So we have to report that all of that has happened. They give us a month to report that, to get all that. It's a lot of information, a lot of different people. But by October 1st, if we've not reported that that has been passed, then we would delay that TISA funding and or lose that TISA funding.
Just to clarify, I'm approving the budget that's been approved, not a random budget that I like more.
Correct.
Just to clarify.
so I guess the question would be the same for federal dollars that we get, federal funding, and if there are things that are funded by federal dollars, are those at risk if hypothetically there's a budget that doesn't go through?
That I don't think so because that usually lags a year, and then we can't, like, the federal money works on a refund, like basically like a refund, like we spend it out of our money and then they refund it.
Yeah, and the commission doesn't have to approve our federal budgets. That was a state law that changed a couple years back, and so only the school board. So the school board has to obviously approve our our federal grants and funding, and so once you all approve those, then we request that reimbursement once it's been.
But you can't spend federal money ahead of time anyway. You have to, like, that's on a reimbursement basis.
Okay.
Can I clarify one other thing? There are state grants are required to be approved by the commission. So ISM grants, Katie's safety grants, there are several of those that are state grants, not federal grants. So state grants do have to be approved. I will be honest with you, I think it was an oversight in how the law was written. If you read the law, federal and private donations don't have to be, but how they worded it, it didn't say state didn't. And so because it didn't explicitly say states do not, they've required us to have the states to approve the county through the county commission. But those funds, if not approved by the county and amendments, because a lot of those funds come in within the fall and we'll amend those in. If those aren't, it does delay processes and us doing different things with our state grants.
I got one more question on that. On that note, so when we get state grant money, is it there are rules associated with it, or does it just go into a pot?
No, so each grant is tracked separately within our accounting. It's
Okay.
required. It's required to be separately tracked within our accounting system, and we separately report all of those funds to the state. So kind of like with federal funds, he was mentioning, we'll spend those funds and then we'll request reimbursement for that. And each grant has different requirements, what they require for reimbursement. Some literally want every receipt, some just want a report, some want different things. And then those are also audited, just like our federal funds are too, and our typical budget. So
So those funds, we use a thing called E-Plan for the state, and we have to submit all the documentation, everything to get approved, and then they fund it, and then there's a whole back-end reporting to account to the state how that money is spent and allocated, as Ms. Brown was saying, and then there are outside audits of all that as well. Yeah, there's not one pot of money. There's a pot with 10,000 little categories.
last year, I think we were managing over besides the GP individually, we were managing over 40 separate individual grants. So each one of those has their own balance sheets and cash balances. At one point, we had over 40 separate grants that we were managing.
All right.
Well, I guess that wraps up our conversation on numbers, so we can talk about more numbers, right? Got the calendar next?
Nope, we got information technology.
More numbers.
Here you go, Chris. All right, and let me introduce to y'all Chris Brown is a native of Sumner County from a family deeply involved in education. He's a graduate of Gallatin High School. He continued his education at Tennessee Tech University, where he earned his bachelor's degree. Chris received certifications in networking, white hat security, and Microsoft Windows deployment, imaging services, and management. He began his career with Sumner County Schools in 2007 as a PC technician. Over the next 6 years, Chris advanced within the department, and in 2013, he was appointed Director of Information Services. Today, he holds the distinction of being the longest-serving IT director in Sumner County Schools history. Also, over the last couple of years, we have finally done something that was long overdue, which is invest significantly in our network infrastructure. And now that we've done that, it's so much easier on Chris and his team. And we've also, going one-to-one with iPad 612, has streamlined a lot of the support and services necessary for his team. They were featured in EdTech. And what was the other one, Chris? I should have mentioned.
Toggle Magazine. I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Okay. Please tell me the picture's on there.
And Ms. Brown.
One is.
And Ms. Brown, where did you graduate from?
Gallatin High School.
We only hire the best.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Brown.
All right. Thank you, guys. Being an IT guy, I have to say that it's weird to be center of attention, even for a little bit of time. So I'm used to being behind the scenes. So pardon if I stumble over some of my words, but here we go. So tonight, I want to talk a little bit about instructional technology and the big push that we've made with one-to-one devices over the last this year and the previous year. But since I'm the one presenting, I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to talk about information services briefly and what we do before I roll into information technology. So I'll get into that. Real quick, just a brief synopsis of what we do, our role within the organization. I'll say that there's a lot of overlap with IT. Obviously, everything we do is in support of some other function of the school district. There's a lot of initiatives, and what I have here on these next couple of slides, they're not all inclusive. They don't encompass everything we do on a day-to-day basis, but they do hit some of the high points. And one of the big ones that I'd point out here is that acquisition of all the district technology. We manage that through our department, and basically what that provides for us is we've learned over the years. I've seen it myself when we didn't have that centralized appropriately. We didn't have standards around the technology that we were acquiring, that we were distributing, putting out in the schools, and it was a challenge to support, to say the least. So now that we have some standards around that, it's easier, it's more streamlined to support. I say easier, it's not easy by any means, but it's easier than it could be. And obviously our infrastructure, security, and all of that stuff that I'll get into here in just a minute. So as I mentioned on that previous slide, we do technology procurement for the entire district. We manage the entire infrastructure of our network, whether that's hardwired, wireless. As far as server and directory services, I'll give you one quick number. Now, our data center, we house 37 physical servers and 71 virtual servers, so 108. As of today, that can fluctuate. Tomorrow, we can add several, or in some circumstances, we might shutter some of those. And then, obviously, device and patch management and things like that. So this slide goes into a little bit more detail. These are the just some quick numbers. What we support on a daily basis today. These are counts of devices. We've got just over 28,000 iPads, over combination 10,000 laptops, desktops, we've got 3,325 wireless access points, 1,050 network switches, 3,265 security cameras, 1,615 IP phones, and that really just kind of scratches the surface of what we might have on our network at any given time. There's a lot of other things that I could go into, and obviously, if I mentioned all of those functions and all of those things, this would be a 50, 100-page slideshow. So these are hitting some of the big numbers. Every single day, every Monday through Friday, every single school day across the district, we have 36,000 simultaneous wireless connections. And what that means is that can float over the course of the day. If you have your phone on the network and you put it in your pocket, or you have a laptop, you close it, those devices, they drop off the wireless network. You might have other devices that come on and authenticate and connect, but what that is, that's an average of 36,000 devices all through the day, simultaneous connections, and that's from the time that we have people showing up in the morning until the time that everybody's going home in the evening. And also, to that same extent, we have 16,000 hardwired connections simultaneously all day long, every day. To Dr. Langford's point earlier about our one-to-one iPad initiative, we had a huge project this past year, not only in deploying those iPads, but we had to make our network ready for that. And I will touch on that a little bit more here in just a second. On this slide, so preparing for that, we wanted to make sure that when those devices landed, that our network was ready. And so we undertook a large rollout of infrastructure. We had what was considered a checkerboard pattern for wireless. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's basically an alternating pattern down a hall every other room. And what that allows you to do is you get coverage. Those rooms that don't have APs in them, they still are covered by overlapping wireless signals from those other rooms that are next door. But it doesn't give you the ability to connect 20+ thousand devices wirelessly at any given time. So we ended up changing from that checkerboard pattern or that coverage model to a density model, which means that we were deploying wireless access points in every single classroom space across the district. And that's, at first, that starts as a numbers game, but what it ends up being, every school has a different character to it. They have different materials in the walls. Some are 50 years old that you can't get a cell signal through any of the walls, or much less wireless signals in some cases. So we had a challenge just getting our minds and our plan around that different character, that different structure in every school, and making sure that we accommodated appropriately. And we did so very successfully, I have to say. And that's, I mean, no thanks to me, that's my team. And everything that you're going to hear in the next few slides is absolutely a celebration of that team. Security camera system upgrades, that and vape sensor installs, those are still underway. We started that last year, and those are ongoing. And the Resilient Internet Circuits, our ISP, we worked with them to at each of our campuses, we had a single path from our provider to each campus. And what we did, we worked with them and planned and constructed a model where every single campus had 2 different paths out to the internet. So you've got some resiliency around that connectivity. So potentially, if a school was to lose one path, they would still have another one that they could fail over to and continue to operate. And in most cases, do so without even realizing that anything had changed. During normal operation, there's a little bit of some load balancing and some improved connectivity. but mainly it's that resiliency that we were looking for. Looking forward, the one thing I want to highlight on this screen is mainly around, obviously, we're going to continue to upgrade, enhance, and grow our technology, but we are participating in state and national cybersecurity reviews and initiatives that we're going to be expanding those measures and expanding some of those protections, which obviously is the that's the world that we live in. Unfortunately, that we can't do enough to protect our environments, and that's there's a lot of places where we have systems like email and things like that. I know I've talked to some of you guys about that, where users, everybody has a certain level of access and a certain level of responsibility around protecting that ecosystem. But this kind of puts some rails on that and kind of will help ensure that protection. So this is I hope this is the picture that Dr. Langford was asking about. This is the one flex I'm going to do tonight. So look, just earlier this year, we were featured in the spring issue of EdTech magazine for the infrastructure, that initiative that I just mentioned, preparing for the one-to-one iPads in middle school and high schools. We were featured not long after that in Toggle magazine, which was, I believe that was the summer issue. And then just right on the heels of that, I did an op-ed on IT team building and retention in a K-12 space. So I think between EdTech and Toggle, it really came across very clear about the importance to me, the emphasis that I put on my team and how important that the work they do every day is. And so that was the reason that I was tasked to prepare that op-ed.
Cover of the Rolling Stone is next.
So I'm pretty proud of that, the All Access Pass. I have a picture of that hanging in the office, and I could stand to lose a few pounds in that picture, but other than that, I think it's pretty perfect. And just a handful of members of my team there behind me, and if the room looks familiar, that's this room that we did the photo in. All right, so as promised, we'll get into our district instructional technology, and that's really a focus on our iPad initiative, and how that's empowering and how that's supporting our day-to-day learning across the district. So in our middle and high schools, last year, in the early fall of last year, we deployed one-to-one iPads for every student. Also, iPads for every teacher. The year prior, we deployed 5 iPads per classroom for K through 2 and an iPad for every administrator. So obviously now we're in year 2 of this deployment, and it's been just an overwhelming success. I really can't say enough about it. One of the things that's impressed me the most in the neighborhood, as I mentioned earlier, that 28,000 number for iPads that we have in the district, the majority of that, 20,000, we deployed last year, roughly. Our AppleCare count beginning last year to today is 271 AppleCare claims. So it's incredibly low how how responsible our students and staff have been with the devices. And we from time to time, we do have pain points around charging cables and things like that, but the device itself is extremely low AppleCare claims, and I'm just every day amazed by that number. We expected maybe not anything astronomical, obviously, but somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 5%, something like that, but way lower than what we had anticipated. Every iPad has 2 repairs, 2 replacements under AppleCare, under that AppleCare warranty per year. So if a student accidentally damages an iPad or something along those lines, then that's a replacement. We can do that twice per device per year. So it's an incredible warranty for the device. So in the event that those numbers did creep up, then we have some coverage on that. All right. So some things that we're doing around just securing the devices, making them safe for use, and things of that nature. We utilize an MDM called Mosel. That's our mobile device management platform. It allows us to push apps out, configuration, updates, software updates, things like that to the devices. We also have the ability to, through that platform, we're able to push content filtering out to the device. And every iPad, regardless of where it's located, has our content filters on it. So if it's at school, it's content filtered by Sumner County Schools. If it's at home, if it's at the beach on vacation, it's content filtered by us. It's always behind our filters, which is that's something that obviously is incredibly important. But that was a have to just with that device. Anytime it leaves, anytime it goes home, any kind of take home initiative like that was a must have, and so we have that, and along that same token, we have the ability to monitor and remote manage those devices wherever they go. So if they, if they're at home, if we need to push an app update or an iOS update or something like that, then we can do that, and they'll get that off hours or at home or wherever that device is. That also gives us the ability, if we have a stolen device, we can remote lock that device. We can basically we make it useless, and it has a nice little message to if found, return to Sumner County Schools. But other than to turn it on and see that screen, there's nothing else that you can do with that device. It's completely bricked at that point. So it gives us some protections if anything happens, if that device somehow walks off and no longer is accounted for. So on the physical side, all of our iPads are cased in a rugged case that's it's pretty amazing at how good it is at protecting the device from damage. There's numerous anecdotes that we could give, several that of devices that have withstood some fairly substantial accidents and were not damaged. And then obviously if you run over it with a car or something, that's a different story, but that's not a story for me to tell. There you go. It's a good case. So in addition to AppleCare, we also have a small allotment of iPads at each middle school and high school. So in the event that a student does damage an iPad and we have to initiate that AppleCare claim, the schools can pull out of that stock, and then they can give that to the student. It's an immediate replacement. then we do the AppleCare claim, we handle that ourselves, and when we get the replacement, we get it back out to the school so they can replenish their stock. If they have to do that over, then they have that stock again. And then really just that focus is on that sustainability, and most importantly, it's equitable for all of our students. All right, and here's some things that I'll say about the key benefits to learning with iPads. That exposure to technology on a regular basis, on a daily basis, it does enhance that digital literacy. They learn how to use technology, students do, but just as important, in my opinion, maybe more important, they learn how to use it responsibly in that setting. We're teaching them skills that are not just how to use it, how to turn it on and do things, but how to do things responsibly, how to use it like we all should. Obviously, it's differentiated instruction. It's not paper and pencil, and it's interactive. It's something that's very different from the way things were done historically. And then just it allows for that extra innovation in the classroom because of that equitable access, not just for students, but also for teachers across the district. So looking ahead, just this is a tomorrow thing, maybe not necessarily a next year thing or 3 years from now, but we're going to continue monitoring that usage, making sure that any replacements, any AppleCare needs are taken care of. We're expanding that technology integration in classrooms, and that's allowing for innovation, but we also have the ability to ensure that innovation is done so in a safe and scalable way. So it's innovation, but it's on rails, and then just also investing in our teachers and students by ensuring that they have that ongoing training on using that technology. And then I'll take questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, are we leasing these? Like, what's the plan for replenishing these? Because if we're on year 2, the reality is most of these are only going to last 3 to 4 years. Like, do we have a set amount we're going to replace every year? Are we leasing them? We pay for them? Like, what's our plan?
So they're purchased. What our plan is right now, and obviously this is subject to change as we discuss internally and with you guys, and we get into.
Let me jump in for a second, Frank.
Sure.
Yeah, I think, Mr. the thing there is they've done a tremendous job managing our fleet with the 2 AppleCare replacements a year. What they will continue to do, what you want to do is get a level A fleet whenever we decide to sell back. Because, for instance, I want to say, like right now, I believe the number was around $120, $125 a device if we sold back after next year.
Gotcha.
Like if we were selling it 3 years right now,
So
that
it's not
fluctuates a little bit.
It's not like we're turning in this old version and getting the same old version. We're getting a new version when we return those in?
Right. So you sell them and then you have to repurchase or release. I think a question that what we're working on, and we're very early, so it's too hard to really say, is we're looking at the options of purchase versus lease because it might be cheaper to cash flow it out over a couple of years. What's called a lease is called a lease by the state of Tennessee. What you're actually doing is purchasing them for Apple with $1 at the end of the lease. So in Apple's mind, you're purchasing them. They're just financing them at 0% over that time. But the state of Tennessee views that as a lease. That requires more work for Ms. Brown's team, so we're trying to figure out exactly what the best path for that is. But I think, what we found is if you remember from previous presentations, 2011, we were investing about $25,000 as a district on technology. Throughout COVID, one of the things I wanted to commend Mr. Brown and his team for is when we started, when COVID hit, we were overwhelmingly a desktop computer district, and we had no mobility, which hurt us deeply. And we moved quickly with Chromebooks. The problem with Chromebooks was it was a great solution early in COVID because it was all you could get. But we knew we were driving off a Chromebook cliff, which led us to the iPad purchase to go one-to-one. I think some of the things we've got to decide is what we don't want to do is find ourselves on a series of cliffs with teacher devices, with admin devices, with student devices. So how do we set that up so that we don't have one big expense a year? We can spread that out over years, but where we can provide what you don't want. Like when I started teaching Sumner County in 2009, I didn't have a computer, and the English department had $285 in their account. So I had to go to Walmart and find a computer for $285, which didn't last long. Technology was very rudimentary at the time because they had like 4 or 5 people for the whole district, and they were putting Band-Aids on everything all the time. So that's where we were. Where we are now is we've got a state-of-the-art, nationally recognized IT department and infrastructure. So really what we're doing now is how do we expand those services? So I think some of the decisions we're going to make during budget time is what's the role of the district device fund money that we give each year individually to schools? How do we, because we save millions by buying them collectively together as opposed to each school buying. And you also don't have these things where if you go to that way where the schools do the exclusive purchasing, you end up with this thing where your schools that are more fluent have cutting edge technology and your title schools have cutting edge technology. You got schools in the middle that don't have the ability and PTO to raise tens of thousands of dollars and things like that. They're having to try to work hard just to have basic levels of technology. We want that playing field to be leveled across the county.
Ms. Prenny?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions for you. Just for my curiosity, what's the rough number of software as a solution tools you're managing out of your department?
That's a good question. I might have to get back to you on
You
that.
can get back to me on that.
Yeah.
I just know it's a heavy load, and as a parent, I'm using a lot of them for the school, so I know that's a lot of work you guys must
Yes.
do.
Yeah.
On the iPads, if I know there's a great tool for screen time for our parents who have iPhones, but our parents who are using the superior Androids are struggling with screen time controls for other kids. Is there something we can do, or at least investigate as a district, where maybe there's a different tool or a partnership we can do with some of the staff where a parent can preset some limits?
We're always looking into potential options for that. There are some limits around just that ecosystem around Apple and what you can manage with Apple devices, but it is something that we're absolutely looking into.
Awesome. And then just final question: when a student loses an iPad, do we have access to the Find My iPad from the district level?
We do have geolocating on those devices. So now I kind of have to qualify it because there are times when that device may be low battery, it won't respond to a request for a location, but we do have that turned on those devices. So we can, in most cases, we can locate that device wherever it happens to be.
Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Barnes?
Yes, Mr. Brown, thank you for
Yes,
the
ma'am.
update. Curious with all of the efforts, the words, impressive of what you've accomplished. What size is your team? I'm curious of how many resources you have.
I have 35 people on staff right now, and it's a light team. It is, but we do have a very broad reach. We can touch a lot of devices all at once. Sometimes that's good, and sometimes that can be bad.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. King?
Yeah, just a question about cybersecurity.
Yes, sir.
How often are we getting hit with hackers or with virus phishing? I mean, have we had some serious situations in the past? I mean, what's the history of that?
Oh, I'll say that we've been incredibly fortunate that we have not had, and I feel like I need to do some kind of like voodoo stuff here by saying this because I might be cursing myself, but we have not had any what I would consider to be a major incident like you hear about in the news, and that's a series of precautions that we take, but also honestly it's some of it's just we haven't been targeted by the right people in different scenarios, but we do have phishing as a constant issue. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's you're in that environment, in our email environments. It's you can only secure it so much before you lose functionality for all of your users, and so you kind of have to rely on everybody being somewhat knowledgeable about how to spot those phishing attempts and catch them and not fall victim to them. We do have some methodologies for when someone does fall victim that we do have some ways of mediating that, but there are times when that mediation may take anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour, and within that time span, that 10 minutes can be a lifetime when we're talking about information services. So there can still be some exposure regardless of how fast we can react. But all that to say, we have had, like I said, some smaller situations with phishing and things like that, but not that big type of security breach.
Are teachers, employees, are they going through any kind of online training for that kind of stuff?
Yes, sir, they are. We have we do have, because that's our biggest area of exposure. That's our biggest, I would say, concern around security. In a lot of cases, we have an annual training as part of our rollout that we do every year for all employees, but also all of our new employees. They have to go through an online course for email security and phishing prevention and things like that.
Cool. Thanks.
We're also audited.
Yeah, and we do. So in addition to the cybersecurity state and national reviews that I mentioned earlier, and some of those consults, we also have state audits from a finance perspective that dig into our technology setup and our practices and procedures, and make sure that we're following best practice.
Anything else? We'll say Ms. Brown is also really good at resetting my password. I appreciate that.
I do that.
Yeah, he's very good at that. So should be a bulletin when I'm there. I just want to point that out. But hey, seriously, thank you. Your team does an amazing job. So
All right.
And just when my boss is asked about Apple and Android, and our employees say, "What do I need to do? I've got an Android. It's better." He says, "Buy an iPhone." So
Yeah.
that's the answer. Sorry. All right. Thank you guys very much. All right. Next item on the agenda. Again, numbers, right? Numbers, ones and zeros with information technology, and now we're back to numbers with the calendar. So
Let me encourage everybody, especially if you're new, there are only so many ways you can count to 180 days, okay? And we got Dr. Jeff Yawn with us today. Jeff is the supervisor of professional growth for Sumner County Schools. He comes to us, Mr. Down, as you pointed out, that Mr. Brown was a Gallatin High School grad. Mr. Yawn is a Beach High School grad.
Go Bucks.
I thought somebody from the Beach family would weigh in, but. Well, tough crowd, Mr. Young or Dr. Young.
So we do make exceptions. That's what you're saying. So.
I mean, the Gallatin reception was way better. He got his bachelor's degree from UT Knoxville, his master's degree from Union, and his doctorate from Lipscomb. He's been a gymnastics coach. Spent 14 years at Beach High School, teaching government and political science. He was the first SCORE fellow as a teacher in Sumner County. And at Beach High School, he was the Youth Rotary Interact sponsor, and they built a school in Kibera, Kenya. It's still operational today. And if you ever worked with Jeff, he's done a tremendous job over the last few years of taking professional growth, professional learning, professional development, and making it not something that we do because we have to get 30 hours a year, but building out a system where we're giving teachers things that, and administrators things that enrich them and help them grow. He's done a tremendous job with that. Probably maybe one of his favorite things, but he's been very innovative in the calendar. Calendar has not been historically something that's been easy to do or popular to do, but Dr. Yon has done it really well and has innovated things like our instructional focus days that are incredibly popular with our teachers and administrators. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Yon.
Thank you, Dr. Langford. And I want to start out by recognizing our team over here with Ms. Stewart, Ms. Soulier, Ms. Barber, and Ms. Collins, who without them I would be completely lost. So I appreciate the guidance that they and support that they provide on this whole process as well, under Ms. Skinner's direction as we look at the fun task of voting for a calendar. I start the committee every year and say, congratulations, you're now part of making a decision that some people are going to like, a lot of vocal people are going to not like, but luckily most people are indifferent in the middle about how this impacts you. But so hopefully after tonight I can give you some explanation as to how the committee came to these three options. And although when you look at the makeup of the committee, there is never going to be a calendar that suits everybody's needs, as Dr. Langford explained. The key is how do we put that puzzle together and come up with the best calendar for the committee, or excuse me, for the district that represents all of its stakeholders. So when we look at the committee composition, I like to start with this because I often hear in emails that I get and phone calls to my office, did you have any teachers on the committee, or did you have any parents on the committee? But here is the makeup of the committee, which the answer is always yes. So I like to, when we my team over here that's here tonight, we sit down along with a member from finance through Ms. Brown's to make sure that when we create the calendar that we're not only within the guardrails of what Tennessee Code Annotated says for the calendar, but also how it impacts the financial component. So there is a member of hers, and this year that was Ms. Palmer. So we don't have a vote on the committee. We simply facilitate the committee. So these numbers do not represent the 6 of us who are from the central office, okay? So that's important to note because we don't vote on the preferences. We simply make sure that we're within board policy and Tennessee Code Annotated parameters. So the communities there that you can see, the beach community this year was a little heavy because whoever the high school principal is, they bring the 2 students that are on the committee who are juniors for upcoming seniors that are part of the committee for their senior year. So the 2, you'll see that there's more people from the beach community, not because of what Dr. Langford introduced me to from earlier. It just so happened that they brought the 2 students this year, so they have higher numbers. But then it's pretty close throughout the rest of the district. There are 3 district personnel because the calendars does impact them, as well as Gallatin. The 2 specialty districts, we don't often have both of our 2 specialty districts represented, but Merrill Hyde and Union had representatives on the committee. So all of our communities, and what we do, that doesn't necessarily mean a representative from the high school is there. It's a school that feeds into the high school by community that we refer to in that situation. Then let's move over to the grade bands. So you can see pretty evenly divided where we have 10 elementary, 9 middle school, 10 high school, and 3 K-12 represented. And then over into the roles of the people that are on the committee, we had 8 administrators from central office personnel outside of our team. That then we had 3 principals, 1 from each grade level, and 3 assistant principals, 1 from each grade level. 3 classified employees, 1 from each grade level, because the calendar does impact our classified personnel. 2 parents from every grade level. 2 students, as I mentioned earlier. 8 teachers, and then 5 specialty, which included school counselors, a school nurse, and a instructional coach that represent all of those components. So you can see the makeup of the stakeholders that are involved in this process here. And they, moving into the timeline for that, the members of the committee actually served for 2 years. Half of the committee rolls off every year. So 50% of the committee was brand new. The other 50% were members last year. So the last thing that we do when the committee meets, this year was on September 10th, as you can see there, is they make a calendar for the, not only they present 3 choices for the following year, and then a proposed calendar for the next year. So this calendar actually started on September 27th, 2023, where the last year's calendar committee said, okay, here's some ideas. And then on September 10th of 2024, this year's committee took that calendar and built the 3 preferences around it gives them a starting point. Sometimes it shows up as a preference. This year the committee came up with 3 completely different preferences, but they do take that as the starting point, and it gives them kind of a baseline start of where we can go and what the previous committee was thinking at that point. Then there's 2 weeks between the 10th and the 20th of September where members of the committee take those ideas and go back and talk to their peers. I tell them from the beginning, your principal recommended you because you have a voice and that you're not scared to share that voice. So use that voice to interact with your peers, whether it was a parent, a student, a teacher, an administrator, a central office personnel, or classified personnel. So that feedback came back to us, and then this year there was actually, through the feedback component over that 2-week process, there was a request to make an adjustment to one of the preferences. Another vote was sent out by our team. We easily met the quorum for that, and then 86% of the committee voted to make that adjustment. So it's not just a one-day we sit down, because we actually meet with finance under Ms. Brown and Mr. Ott through HR to make sure, okay, how does this look, and do these fit within the parameters? And then that gives us time before it goes out to you guys, like last Friday, if there are any issues, so I can take it back to the committee. And then we are right here on October 1st for the board study session. You'll vote on which preference that you feel would be in the best interest of all of our students and personnel, as well as the community and parents, on the 15th. And then usually if we go with the use of the instructional focus days, which are in all 3 calendars, and I'll explain that here in a minute, the TDOE has to approve those. And that process, the applications through my office that are submitted, usually when they open up at the beginning of February, and we know sometime within February or early March whether or not the final approval is used for an instructional focus day. So that's the timeline of where we came to on this committee. So to give you some background of what is required by the instructional calendar. So TCA 496304 states that really this is a 200-day calendar, but that gets confusing when I say it's a 200-day calendar and there's only 190 days calendared. But Ms. Brown's team and Mr. Ott's team will then assign 10 days that are paid holidays. So that is just randomly put onto the days where we're not doing anything, like on Memorial Day and over winter break and Christmas break. So what the committee is responsible for is coming up with 190 days. 180 of those are student days, 5 of those are professional learning days, and 5 of those are what we call administrative days, or in state statute are known as discretionary days. So that's the makeup. One of the 5 administrative days per TCA has to be a parent-teacher conference, okay? So again, these are the parameters that we make sure my team makes sure the committee stays connected to. So what Sumner County Schools calls instructional focus days is known in state statute as stockpile days. 30 minutes of our school days are added to every school day, and at the end of the year, the accumulation of that time makes 13 stockpile days. Historically, those have been used for inclement weather. However, most of the years, and we'll see this slide here in just a second, we don't use anywhere close to those 13 days. So we're going extra days. Students are attending extra days, and they are doing more, but you can't just say, oh, we're going to take the last 10 days off because we only use 3 stockpile days. Through the director of schools, Dr. Langford can close schools due to inclement weather. However, if we calendar those days up front, they have to be approved by the TDOE. That was the approval process that I was talking about on the previous slide. So if you look down there on that final bullet point, in order to get the TDOE approval, they have to be these stockpile days. What you're doing is you're taking one of the 180 instructional days away from students. So if the TDOE is going to approve that, it has to be for professional development or instructional planning, which in our communication with the state is not, there's not much difference between those two. They expect there to be some type of growth of the teacher at that level, because we want to enhance their effectiveness if that student isn't sitting in the class that day, according to the TDOE guidelines. So what that looks like is the instructional focus days can only come out of the 180 student days. They cannot come out of the professional learning days, and they cannot come out of the administrative days. So hence those 2 buckets, as I like to refer to them as, part of the calendar. Those have to come out of the 180. And by the way, I apologize, I should have said this earlier. There's a sheet in your packet that kind of highlights these components. So what we're looking at according to the calendar's committee's preference, is that these 180 days will be taken down to 175. 5 of those will be used for stockpile / instructional focus days, which those 2 together will add up for the 180 instruction days that students are required to attend. And that will leave us 8 stockpile days for inclement weather. One of the 5 stockpile days is a flex day. So this is an important distinction, because 4 of the 5 instructional focus days have to be attended on that particular day, whatever it's calendared. So if it, like this year, it was August 1st, 5th, and 6th. Teachers attended on those. But the last day of the winter break is January 3rd. That's a flex day. So the teachers can put in those hours through trainings leading up to that and not have to actually attend on that particular day. Next year, because we have an election in May, the committee recommended that we move the flex day to May, and then they can work on those hours throughout the year leading up to May 5th. So very similar to what we do with professional learning days 4 and 5, which are usually on President's Day, or in this year on an election day. They can, principals can have trainings after school, or they can do things during the summer, or they can bring them early on parent-teacher conference days, different things like that to earn those hours, but not necessarily on those particular days that might fall to prohibit a teacher to have a 3-day weekend or an extended winter break. So here are since 2003, Dr. David Hallman has kept a close track record of these over the years. So you can see what the last year was a unique year because we had a tornado and a storm hit. So we did exceed those 8 days that would be left. However, historically, outside of the asterisk marks, and those were impacted by COVID days, so we don't usually come close to those, exceeding those 8 days. There is a process through, if for some reason we were to go over those, it's not we can either make that up or you would adjust the calendar as the board, or there is a waiver process that we can request from the TDOE above the 13 days because of extenuating circumstances like in a tornado and a flood that came through last year. All right, so how did we get to instructional focus days? This is kind of a history lesson. I know there's a lot of content on this page, but if you look at this page in your packet, that information is on there. So historically, the calendar committee has been able to use this less days in the fall, which would allow us to start later, and then we would make up those days in the spring. Okay, because you try to balance it as close as possible, but as long as it's not like a weird thing like 10 plus days one semester, then these 3 days that we went for having 87 days, 3 days short, and then we had 93 in the second. We did that for years. And but in 2021, we shifted to a full week off of Thanksgiving. And when you look at 1 or 2 days, you think, oh, that's not that big a deal. But on a calendar that's as tight as this one this year, it's a huge deal. So when the calendar switched to Thanksgiving, and I know it's weird because you think we must start at the beginning of the year, but we really start at Memorial Day. Like, when is Memorial Day? Because historically, that's when we get out for the summer in Sumner County schools. So in 2021, or the 2021 calendar, excuse me, Memorial Day happened to be on the last day of the month. And that really gave us an extra week than what we have next year. Next year, every year since 2020-21, we've lost 1, and in 2024, we lost 2 days away from Memorial Day. And next year is the furthest it's going to be on May 25th. So we essentially have lost a week. And that's why you see those earlier start dates, because they have to come from somewhere. But the May 25th, because a lot of people only see the beginning of the start and they're like, why are we starting so early, not realizing that we're going to be finishing a week later. Then we realized, so that was the argument we made. Then we realized, well, we got feedback from members on this board that, hey, this group from this particular district, they're starting a week after we are, but they're finishing at the same time we are. Well, when we dug into that, our team spent months last year digging into this. We found out that when you looked a little closer at their employee calendar, teachers were actually starting the same time we were. The students were starting later because they were using front-loaded stockpile days, because those were training days that teachers could use, or they were using those flex days during the week of fall break or during the week of Thanksgiving to use that time to count towards those days. So we brought that to the committee through Dr. Langford's permission to see what the committee thought about that. And they wanted to use the instructional focus days last year, or the stockpile days. So from fiscal year 23-24, the first day was August 1st, and that is where we started getting the feedback. Why are we going back to school so early? So the next year is when we implemented the instructional focus days. And the districts use those stockpile stockpile days for the professional development. So that's where the instructional focus days were kind of born, because parents were like, we're really starting early. And then it's almost like those 5 student days are hidden in with the teacher development days, because the teachers are working those 180 days or 190 days, but students aren't necessarily attending those. And so it gave us the flexibility to not bring students back so early, but it does require that the teachers have some type of training. So you're actually taking their professional learning days in that one bucket, and then adding additional professional learning days for the stockpile days or the instructional focus days to enhance their effectiveness in the classroom. That will then transfer over to the student learning there. So the TDOE did approve those for us, and allowed us to have the later start date of August 7th. So we went from August 1st to August 7th in 1 year. So that extra week was very popular by the parents. Some points of interest from this committee. This was the first year we had done instructional focus days, as I mentioned, so we're learning to make this better. There's going to be some hiccups. We know now, as you can see here, that an administrative day has more flexibility. Okay, and I want to stress that, where the state is going to require that some type of professional development or instructional planning happens on those instructional focus days. The administrative days are discretionary days. That's up to the administrator at the building. So what the committee asked this year is to start an administrative day prior to student registration, particularly for our elementary teachers who have students come to their classrooms, that they would have time in that day built in to work on that setup, and where they couldn't necessarily do that on an instructional focus day because there should be some type of professional development happening that day. The parents and students obviously wanted to keep the first day for students later. You know, with how tight the calendar is, we did have to move it up to the 4th, but at least it's not, you know, August 1st there. Teacher trainings at the building, so whatever day the first day students are actually in the classroom, teachers on the committee requested, let's make sure that it's not a district-wide training. Can we keep that instructional focus day at the building level? Okay, that was a request, instead of having a district-wide professional learning day. Make the instructional focus days ongoing throughout the year. The pull and give on the committee was, okay, if we make them throughout, that was a strong point that was made by the teachers on the committee. If we make them throughout the year, which I'm all for as the professional learning supervisor, because ongoing professional learning is more impactful, it takes away from the opportunity to be able to use them at the beginning to push the start date back. So again, where's the give and take on that is where the committee was stuck in how they had to come up with a solution there. And then fall and Thanksgiving breaks, it's been proposed the last couple of years, maybe we take some days off of that. Wasn't even a discussion this year, because it was an automatic, this is what the 3 proposals that were brought forth had, that those stayed on there as a full week. And then we hear people request every year that the winter break have 3 weekends. And the way the flex day is written into all 3 calendars, or a flexible PL day, on that last day of winter break, you have 3 full weekends that a teacher could potentially have. Most teachers will have off. Some will come to trainings that day, but the vast majority of teachers will be having those 3 full weekends during winter break there off. So those were the big points of interest there. So there's a flyer in your packet there that looks like this, that has the differences. This is a request from the board last year that could say that. So we took your feedback from last year and said, could you provide us with what, we can look at the 3 different ones, but then you get, like we do, and start seeing blurry things. As Mr. Daniels pointed out earlier, we're talking about lots of numbers, and then they get merged into the one. So there's 1 and 3 started out very similar, And like I said earlier, there was a typo on what was sent out previously. I apologize for that, but we missed the last day of quarter one on preference one should be October 3rd. It originally mirrored preference 3, and when it was updated after the committee recommended a change, and it is updated in your current versions that you have, but the original version sent out last Friday had October 2nd because we fixed everything on there except for changing that one thing. So I apologize for that. But the parent-teacher conferences are the same for preferences 1 and 2, but they moved to September 22nd on preference 3. Quarter 1 ends on October 3rd for preference 1, giving 44 student days, where in preference 2, that instructional focus day 3 is actually January 5th, giving them an extra day, students an extra day at winter break, but requiring teachers to come back for a training on that August 5th. Which is not a flex day like it is this year, but it's on the Monday after that 3rd weekend. And then preference 3, you have the instructional focus day before fall break. The committee changed that recommendation in preference 1 with, and I'll state what the overwhelming majority that voted to change this said that our teachers would come back refreshed after a break on fall break and have a more quality professional learning on the instructional focus day on October 13th than being exhausted on October 3rd thinking about their fall break and how excited they are instead of sitting in a training and then having to go back there. And then that adds another student day to that takes another student day away from quarter 1 by having it October 3rd because you're using the instructional focus day as a student day, but students won't be there. Option 1, the committee liked that it was moved to quarter 2. So you're taking that student day away from quarter 2 instead of quarter 1, which makes a big difference for our high school courses that are only 45 days as a quarter. Then that just basically changes the numbers by 1. In semester 1, you have 87 student days and 88 in the first preference. Second preference is 88 in the first quarter and 87 in the second, and then back to 87 and 88 in preference 3. So the overwhelming majority was for preference 1. 75% of the committee wanted preference 1, and then 69% voted for preference 2 as option 2. Not necessarily, some of them wanted it as option 1, but 69% wanted it as option 2. And then by default, the third option that was presented was your third preference there. So those are the differences between the 3 preferences. We added this at the recommendation of one of our team members here. It's hard to see the totality of what it looks like from the end of one school year to the beginning of next year when you're starting with July of next year. So this slide, and there's at the top of the what our instructional focus, how instructional focus days emerged. This shows you what the end of this year looks like into next year. And like I said, since we've moved up a week, teachers are actually still getting the same amount of time off. They're getting that 8.4 weeks off. With the thing that they're not seeing when you just look at the current options is that it's only showing July. But this screen I think tells a clearer story that you have that 1 week, that last week in May, all of those weeks in June, and then 3.4 weeks in July to give you the total of 8 weeks. And when you look at what students have, they have 10.4 weeks off in all 3 of these options, regardless which of your options that there are. So I think this really kind of tells more of the whole story versus where we're probably not looking at that the end of last year when we're just now looking at the proposed calendars for next year. And then just so you're wondering why we take election days off, 18 of our 29 schools are election precincts, so we can't have students in the building with people from the public coming in like that. So when you look at the random, certain days we have to take off. And then one other thing I would just like to draw your attention to, you can see starting in January, we have no decision that we can make about when Martin Luther King Jr. Day is, President's Day, Good Friday, Election Day, or Memorial Day. So that really, you can see there's not an empty day from January to Memorial Day. So the only flexibility that you really have is in the fall, unless you're playing with these instructional focus days. So because of how that tight window is and Memorial Day being so early, it really boxed this year's committee, and I know they had a very tough task because they didn't have a lot of room that you could play with in the spring semester. Because it was like, in order to get these days in, you've got to, where we normally could sometimes add extra days to the spring, and there's nothing left when you take out those holidays available there. So I will be happy to, excuse me, I think I said, misspoke earlier when I said 18 of our 29 precincts. Thank you, team, for correcting me on that. I'm not sure what I said, but apparently I didn't say 18 over 29. So what questions do you have?
One thing I do want to mention is that the union schedule is voted on separately. So once this is approved, then Lance usually, or Mr. Taylor usually looks at the schedule, and then we'll vote on it separately. So it is taken into account. So and I believe he's typically aware of the committee's decisions too. So he's already working on that, and he'll provide that plan to us. So
I'd say he already has a version made for each version.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mr. Lancaster.
Thank y'all. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody that served on that committee. First of all, option one is 75% of the people. I mean, these are not just not random choices, but not three unweighted choices. Option one is 75% is what the committee voted on.
Correct. Yes, sir. Yeah. Option one is the first choice. Preference two is the second choice, and then preference three is the third choice.
Okay.
In that order.
Second, I appreciate y'all letting us be off the day after Halloween and all of that. That's
that was an easy task this year.
Worked out really well.
That Saturday worked out.
That was the first thing I checked. I hope we're off November 1st.
Yes.
For our new board members, the day after Halloween is a huge request for elementary and middle schools, and we lucked out. We didn't have to worry about it this year because it's on a weekend, or next year, excuse me.
Also love the student calendar and all of these. You know, that's a favorite of mine. But the biggest feedback, that I think I get from teachers is, and I think you touched on this, and I just kind of want to double check on it. Will we have time in our classrooms prior to the start of school? Because nobody wants to work unpaid.
Sure.
And that's what the feedback I got was, hey, we had to come in the summer prior to all these drive conferences and everything else. We just didn't have the opportunity to work in our classroom and stuff.
So I think that's a conversation that Ms. Skinner and myself and Dr. Langford will make, now that we have the instructional focus days, like, should we reimagine what administrative days look like? Because what the instructional focus days were, we're dictated to do these particular things to give up that seat time. Administrative days are actually named, when Ms. Collins puts it into the ESS system, they're named discretionary days. So it's pretty much how we want to define them. So I think that's a new conversation that we we'll have to give. I can't promise that that's what's going to happen on those, but I think, I mean, y'all, not to put you on the spot, dude.
What's the definition of an administrative day? When you say discretionary, explain to me.
So discretionary allows the district to decide how we're going to use those days, with the exception of one of them being a parent-teacher conference. So our school system has always called those discretionary days administrative days, leaving them up to the principals to decide what to do. And that's oftentimes where you have team building things, you do a lot of house cleaning stuff for brand new teachers on that day and veteran teachers, and you go into what you would do on how to have your department meetings. So now that we have the instructional focus days, some of those could be trainings that happen on the 2 instructional focus days there on the 31st of July and August 1st, whereas the administrative days could potentially.
Administrators could choose to let teachers work in their classroom.
Correct.
That's honestly, that's the biggest feedback we get is, hey, you know, we, especially elementary teachers, but I mean, I think it's all of them. But when you know, have to stack up all your desks and put everything in one side of the room to get the floors done during the summer, and then you come in and you have, you know, don't have time to get your classroom in order and all that stuff. I think that's the big thing.
Yeah, and I think this year was a little bit different in the sense that we as a district invested heavily in TCIS training for all teachers. So that was, for TCIS, it has to be 3 consecutive days. So we had teachers training all summer from the day school was out until.
Well, they had 188 opportunities. They
Yeah.
only had to choose
Right,
3 days
right,
in a row.
right. But so they had all those all summer. But then I think that was so what was reflected in the calendar for elementary schools to have one day in the school before they went to other training. So we were kind of boxed in a little bit this year because we made a decision to invest heavily in the TCIS training last year. We won't have something that requires 3 professional learning days back to back to back this summer that we had last summer. And I think that'll help tremendously.
Correct. And to build off of that, Dr. Langford, the TCIS training was didn't talk about curricula. We still had almost 200 new hires that had no knowledge of our ELA or math curriculum. So one of those instructional focus days prior to the start of school this year needed to be geared towards that. So again, it was a growing pain. It was a brand new concept last year. We've learned, we've listened to the feedback, and these 3 calendars reflect what teachers voiced at the committee, to where we could put not only that very first day back as an administrative day, but they have 2 half days stacked on top of the student registration days, that if principals don't get covered what they might want, where teachers could be working in their classroom on that first day, they could hit some of those prior to the evening registration night.
And the other question I've got is, can you explain a principal discretion day, and our teacher or any of our principals going to make the discretion that teachers have to come the 2nd of January?
Great question. So board policy says that 3 professional learning days are district led. Okay, and those are what we call the drive conference. So those are district level professional learning, like Dr. Langford said. Next year we can spread out those trainings where it's not going to be TCIS. Days 4 and day 5 are, according to board policy, given to the principals at the building level for professional learning, and they're allowed to flex that time out. Some meet over the summer. Some have 1-hour trainings after school throughout the year. Some bring their teachers in 3 hours early before parent-teacher conferences. They send me a PL plan each year that details what that looks like. I can't answer, because it is given to the principal, if they are going to require their teachers to be there, because accordingly they have that ability to do that. but most principals are going to see that just like, think of it as every other year where those days used to be on Martin Luther King and President's Day. Most principals don't require their teachers to attend on those holidays. They flex those days out. All of your high schools have PLCs throughout the year for day 5. So that knocks out President's Day. So it's the same thing. It's just the calendar committee 3 years ago, I believe, wanted to take everything off of Martin Luther King Jr. Day and recognize that as a holiday. So that's why it kind of got, and they're like, oh, well, people are flexing that day out anyway. Let's just stick it at the end of winter break.
All right, I just know that's a question we sometimes, or I got last year was, y'all are making us work on the Friday, and I'm like, no, I just want to hear that explanation. Basically, though, that is a flex day that principals have discretion to utilize at other times of the year. We just put the actual use of that day on the calendar on those.
Correct.
We have to put it on the calendar to pay it. So a lot of principals will do like 6 1-hour PLC meetings or 6 1-hour trainings or things like that. So the teachers earn it ahead of time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Graham? I was just saying, it's this year's a little bit of a set challenge because the next year, January 4th would be that Monday, and then you would actually, Memorial Day would be May 31st.
Correct.
So you're going to get back that extra week, and you won't have to worry about the Friday after. So I know I'm not trying to look ahead, but like this 1 year is just a little different.
Right.
So,
And this is the first cycle that we've gone through the end. We lucked out that first year of Thanksgiving, and this is the last year of an entire cycle. So it will be recurring, but next year we'll have, the next couple of years after, starting in 26, 27, there will be that flexibility. And I counted them up prior to today. The teachers actually have more weeks off or more days off in next year's calendar than they did in that 2021 calendar where there was the extra week in May because of the start date. So counting that week off in May, they actually have 2 more days off, I believe it was. And if they're not a new hire, they actually get a 3rd day there. Because that you see there on the 23rd of July, that's only impacts new hires.
Ms. Purdy?
I want to just second that I would love, especially for focusing on supporting new teachers, I would love to see one of those administrative days or some of those administrative days put towards time to set up classrooms, time to prep for instruction, to prepare for the year. I've got one comment. I don't think there's any way around it, but starting at the beginning of a week is incredibly hard on elementary school students, and I'm assuming teachers as well, and parents. So if there's any flex to look at moving some of the days around so that we don't have a full first week that first year, or that first week, I think that's something that parents and teachers would be very grateful for. And then I had some band camp concerns from parents and band directors around the way that the drive days are set up for the beginning of the year. So if we were able to move both drive days to the 24th and 25th, that first week, and make them available to do during, like optional to do during the summer, that gives a full extra week to do band camp across the week of the 14th and the week of the 21st, instead of me making it push back to the week of the 7th and the week of the 14th. From what I'm being told, that's pretty consistent across band camps in the district. And assuming that you've got some band students who do summer scholars, that really limits family time during the summer, options for family vacation. It also does the same for our teachers. So we could talk about that being an option. I think that would be really helpful.
Could you repeat your recommendation again?
Yes. We move the drive days to be the 24th and the 25th and make them optional to do during the summer. And then have the administrative days be the 28th, 29th, and 30th. That allows the band camp directors to do their drive days ahead of time and use those the 14th and the 21st for band camp.
The only pushback that I would give based on the committee's recommendation is that you're moving the PL day, the drive day, to the 24th, which the committee really pushed for, as I said, points of interest, that they wanted that work day, that administrative day, like you had mentioned, especially for our new teachers. You're now stacking it on top of the registration nights and not giving those teachers that day to set up their classroom.
The hard part with that is when you stack, we've done this in the past where you stack registration nights and PL or admin days, and that means that your folks are in the building from 7:30, 8 o'clock until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I would say as a high school principal for a while and a high school person, you know, we always were able to work football practice, soccer, everything like that around. Usually schools are going to accommodate around to make sure that can happen, because I think it'll be really hard. You know, I mean, I do think one of the things that I heard this year from a lot of people was wanting that full day before, because otherwise elementary teachers are having to come up on the weekend, try to get their rooms ready before parents showed up on the registration night. So I would be a little concerned about not having that day for them to get their classrooms ready.
And also the admins on, not only the admins on the committee, but others that I've spoken to, they want that first day with their teachers, where they wouldn't, like, if versus where they start out, oh, hey, good luck at the district training, because those drive days are district-wide trainings, so their teachers would be showing up, and then they're coming back on a Monday after 2 days of training without having met as a whole faculty.
And I do think we can absolutely look at, I mean, I think Ms. Skinner, Michelle, and Dr. Yon, they can look at on those drive days, is there a way, because I think one of the things that was really positive feedback about TCIS training this year, because it had to be 3 consecutive days, so we spaced it out and gave options across the summer. I don't think, we can't give, Ms. Skinner was 188 different combinations of times you could take TCIS training. We won't have that much flexibility, but we can try to build some flexibility in, you know, so your coaches and band directors, things like that, can complete their training early.
And if those band directors, you know, for a school business, which this would be, reach out to me, and, you know, we would make a, you know, I mean, that, I don't want to say like everything, you know, because then I'm going to get flooded with every type of, but, you know, something that's critical to that time of year, like band camp, you know, going into the football season, you know, what options are available? Like Dr. Langford said, could we have an option in June? Like this year, there's no way we could replicate that because we had, but we might be able to offer some options during June to knock those out.
Just so I'm understanding, if registration is the 28th, wouldn't they still have at least a day to set up their classroom before parents got there?
They wouldn't be working on the, let's see.
They have
an administrative day right now.
Yeah, they got half days.
Those are the 28th and 29th is actually one purple day. It's a half admin day and a half registration day, and then the next day is a half admin and a half registration. So the 2 days make up 1 day for each of those, because that registration day actually counts as the first student day.
The first year that I was here, and I couldn't duck it because I was on the calendar committee the previous year, and recommended a calendar that had the first 2 days and the first 2 nights being full day activities and registration nights. And by far the thing I was caught the most criticism for, including from a number of principals, is why on earth would we go 3 straight days, day and night, with 2 nights back to back? And that's what you really want to, that's really hard on, because, you know, then the administrative days and the PL days become ineffective because you just can't. That first week of school is a sprint for teachers and administrators. Because, you know, in addition to all that, you've got new kids coming in wanting to register, and families coming in, and you've got scrimmages and sports and everything, band and everything else beginning. It's just, it's a hot time. So I think we can probably address some of it I'm a little hesitant to try to move what the calendar committee recommended to accommodate a couple band directors that have asked it. I think that, as Dr. Yon mentioned, we can work around some of those concerns. Usually principals are going to handle that locally in a building if it's an admin day. You know, they're going to have a couple hours of meetings, and then they're going to give teachers time in their rooms to get set up, and you know, you might stagger the start of band camp a little bit or something like that. But you know, I mean, we've been doing this for a long time at the school level with activities like, you know, left to their preferences, football coaches a lot of times would practice 3 times a day, every day. And, you know, but when we set the guidelines on what we can do, we always manage to work around it and figure out. And, you know, and the other thing is a lot of times during those days, you're limited in what you can do outside during the day anyway, because usually it's about 135 degrees, and we don't let anybody go outside because of the heat anyway.
I'll give you another example. Last year, a drive day was on the election day, and on the day after Halloween, which was in November, and it happened to be during the National FFA Conference. Well, all of our FFA teachers that were taking students to that, they just reached out to me, and I was like, okay, clearly this is a reason to, you know, excuse you for that particular day. They made up the hours, but it would just be, you know, if that's, you know, working on that on a case-by-case basis and letting them know that, you know, that could potentially be an option if, and we could work through this. Now, they couldn't change the FFA National Convention, obviously, but what can we do to accommodate that, especially since, like Dr. Langford said, they're not 3 days back-to-back required. And
So I can connect you with the band
Absolutely.
directors that have been great.
just have them reach out to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just be honest. I wouldn't recommend reworking the entire calendar for band or football or soccer or anything like that. There's a lot of work put into it on this committee, and I think if there's something big and glaring, we should consider that. But to me, that's something that schools can handle locally, and we can work together on district stuff to address.
It's really cool on the committee to see how elementary comes in, and after hearing high school's perspectives, the mindset it shifts. And then, like, one of our, for the last 2 years, our middle school representatives have come in like, hey man, that's killing us to go parent-teacher conferences on Monday and football on Tuesday nights. We're 2 late nights in a row. And then this committee starts talking, well, where are you going to move them? Well, we're not going to move it to Wednesday night. We're not going to move it to Thursday night because you hit JV, and we're not going to put it on Friday night football. So then it comes back to, well, maybe Monday night is the best night in those. So like he said, to see them all, that group that you saw earlier, work together from the different perspectives, not everybody gets what they want because you're talking about so many diverse groups of people and interests and the lenses that they see on that.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right. I was just saying, in reality, I mean, the 26th and 27th, they're going to be in the classroom anyway. I mean, let's be real.
What's that?
The teachers, I mean, my wife's a teacher. I know that pretty much that weekend before, she's in the classroom. So the reality is most of them are going to go anyway during that weekend.
To finish up what they did.
Yeah.
Well, I just think we want to make it where you're doing that because you want to, not because you have to, because we haven't allocated any time. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, I mean, you're chomping at the bit to get the school year going. I mean, I did the same thing.
When I went along with teaching Station Camp Elementary, that was always the weekend I went and set up for computers. So before I went back to college, it was a fun time.
And I think it's a win for the teachers to see, hey, we heard your feedback. You know, here's this admin day up front as well. All right.
Thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda, discussion regarding policy 4.214, use of artificial intelligence programs prior to second reading. Questions, comments? All right, seeing none, next item on the agenda, discussion regarding policy 3.402, special use of district vehicles prior to the first reading. Anybody have a quick overview of this policy? Jeremy?
So, you know, our HR department has been going through reviewing policies, and this was one that we missed from adding to the next agenda. We realized that we needed a policy in this because we didn't have one, so here we are.
Thank you. Mr. Lancaster? Nope, nothing.
I was just about to ask what the change was.
Currently don't have a written.
The change is all in it.
Changes, we have a policy. All right.
Yeah, I think it protects us. It gives us some guidelines on how to use, so if there's any questions about how an employee, I mean, honestly, I think what it does is it protects our employees if there's a complaint about a county vehicle. It gives them parameters on to know what's appropriate use.
Yeah, we came to the realization our current policy is more oral tradition than actual policy, so.
All right. Well, looks like that's it tonight. Anything else, Dr. Langford?
No, I think that's all. I just to echo what you said earlier. I communicated with the superintendent in Unicoi County over the weekend, and I asked him what the extent of their damage was, and he said they really had no idea. For Greene County, so there's around because they can't access everything. He said, especially in the southern part of his county. So I think I got an email from the superintendent of Franklin Special School District. He's kind of the head of our group of superintendents in this area, and he said that they're still very much, as you mentioned, they're still very much in the assessment to try to figure out, and that he would share more details about things we could do. I know Beach High School has already organized a blood drive to support the flood-stricken regions with the American Red Cross, and I would anticipate. Where was it that we heard at strategic planning today that the leaders? Oh, it was at Middle College, Ball State, that they were their leaders were talking about ways that they could collect water and things like that. Our kids usually organize a lot, and schools usually organize a lot of stuff. So we'll share those as they become available. But I think keeping that region in our thoughts and prayers is important.
And I think there's a number of other schools, Beach, and Portland, and some other schools are also collecting supplies and stuff. So appreciate the community stepping up and trying to help those in need, because we had a lot of communities reach out and help us when the tornadoes came through and other events. So it's good that we've got a community that cares. It's great to be part of Sumner County. So anyway, with that, thank you guys very much, and have a great night. Meeting adjourned.